The Purple Butterfly Healing Center proudly presents Let's Play Canada, a listening series that aims to give voice to child and play therapists, supervisors, interns, and all lovers of play. May the therapeutic powers of play be elevated here in Canada by highlighting voices and promoting connection across the country. Telling our stories and hearing the stories of others stitches together a collective narrative of the healing landscape across our great country. I am Billie-Jo Bennett, registered social worker and Canadian play therapy supervisor, owner and clinical director of the Purple Butterfly Healing Center in Cambridge, Ontario. Our first series, which I am so very pleased to bring to your listening ears, is our Living Legend series, focusing on play therapy experts across Canada.
Hello, everybody. I am here today with Greg Lubimiv. He's a registered social worker, Canadian play therapy supervisor, and has been a trainer with CAPT for over 35 years. He is currently retired from his 41-year position at the Phoenix Center and is now in private practice in Petawawa, Ontario, offering supervision and consultation. So Greg, thank you so much for being here today with me and taking the time to be interviewed for Let's Play Canada, this little podcast that I've put together connecting people across the country. And so I'm wondering, would it be okay if I asked you some questions about your career and your influences in becoming a play therapy supervisor, a play therapist to begin with, and you're kind of known as the puppet guy. Like you've got when you come to the foundation trainings, that's the biggest thing that I remember about my training with you was working with those puppets. And so would it be okay if I asked you some questions about that stuff?
Absolutely, Billie-Jo. And thank you for the invitation. I think it's a wonderful project that you're endeavoring. There's a lot of great people out there who've been leaders in trying to influence others to build play therapy, the play therapy world. And it's getting somewhere now. The Play Therapy Association has made great inroads, and I've had the great opportunity of training now probably thousands of people who've come through the course over the last 35 years.
Yeah. And, but before we started talking, recorded, we're talking about sort of Canadian play therapy being still sort of feeling like it's in its infancy a little bit. But, the idea that there are incredible narratives and stories of folks that have been around for a while that, have things to, let us know about that will, influence others and maybe inspire others in terms of their learning journey in the play therapy world. So I'm wondering, would you be able to just tell me about how you got started in this?
Yeah, when I began with my Bachelor of Social Work and later with my master's in the 70s, there's very little on play therapy in the formal education system. I think I saw a paragraph in in a psychology book that we were taking as one of our introductory to psychology. And it really didn't hit me until my first job, which after my Bachelor of Social Work at Laurentian, I went to Northwest Territories and worked in Hay River. And in the position with the Department of Social Development, you did everything. You were a counselor, you were a social assistance officer, you were a probation officer, you were a community developer, you were a school mental health worker. So it was all the hats were on one person, which created some issues in terms of roles. When you see someone who's on welfare, you just took away their child, and then you're saying, "Hey, tell me what your problems." Was a little bit of contradiction there, but it was a good start, and I had a large caseload of children, and I just found that talking with the kids, they got bored very quickly and agitated quickly. A lot of no-shows. And I started to think about what would be more engaging and attractive for them And one of the things that I grew up with were metaphors and stories. My father was a great metaphor teller. He was in his thick Ukrainian accent, but it was always a nice way I could understand things through a metaphor or a story, much better than just telling me sort of the dictionary way that would be provided. And so I started using metaphors and stories. And I happened across a book by accident by Richard Gardner, which was mutual storytelling. And I just loved that model where you had kids pick a couple of items from a bag where there are lots of items. And I would start by picking some, and I would tell a story about those items, and they would tell a story about their items. And then you could base your story on some of the themes that they would have. And so I started using that, and it had great outcome. Kids were much more engaged. I was getting a different level of information from the kids that I wouldn't normally get. And then I read Dibs in Search of Self, and that influenced me greatly in terms of just the power of just play alone. And that started my investigation and exploration into the world of play and looking for what was out there. And there, again, not very much in formal research, almost nothing. A few spatterings of books. And my biggest mentor then emerged, which was Milton Erickson. And Milton Erickson was in the States, and there's maybe 10 books now. He died a long time ago. But just a story about his life where he had polio, and he was told he'd never walk. And he basically forced his mind to think about walking all the time and to visualize himself walking. And his career as a professional in training others, it was creative, it was fun. He used storytelling, used metaphors, he used hypnosis. He was very playful in how he taught, and even the creative. I remember one of his activities was putting a straw through a potato, which I've used in the in-person.
For that
came from Milton Erickson, and just and even just the stories about him. His father was a farmer, not very well off. And he was about 9 at the time, and his dad was trying to put the donkey in the barn, and his dad was pulling and pulling and pulling, and it wasn't getting anywhere. And Milton was laughing at his dad, and his dad got mad. He says, "You think you could do better?" And he said, "Sure, I think I can." He said, "Well, okay, you get that mule in the barn." So he went to the mule. He went behind the mule, and he pulled the tail. And the mule, of course, resisted, but it resisted by moving forward and went into the barn. And those sorts of stories really impress me in terms of thinking out of the box, thinking differently, thinking about resistance, thinking about more playful ways of working. And that's when I had the opportunity to go for my master's. And there was a psychiatrist there. And when my placement was with the Clark Institute of Psychiatry, which doesn't exist anymore. And I was placed with a day treatment program with exceptional children with behavioral issues. And the team used play-based activities a lot. And so I was immersed in that and learned a huge amount. From there, I went to work in Children's Aid for 2 years as a supervisor. I supervised all of the staff in the Kirkland Lake, District of Temiskaming Children's Aid, and tried to bring a lot of creative thinking and innovation, but it wasn't the right place. So it was actually pretty frustrating to work in the child protection world and try and think out of the box and be out of the box. And after 2 years there, there was a posting for a job. A new agency had started up, a Children's Mental Health Center in Pembroke, Ontario, serving Renfrew County. They were looking for an executive director, and I applied. And in the interview, what was really attractive is there was only staff of 4 clinicians, an administration person, and they wanted someone who would actually do clinical work and also be executive director. And it was about 80% clinical work and 20% ED. And I thought that was really, that attracted me tremendously, because that's what I really was wanting to do, was more the clinical. But I really had an advantage of not just doing the clinical, but being in control of the agency.
Right.
All the staff were not professional staff. They weren't social workers. They were social service workers, BAs, and the work was intensive home-based work, which was really interesting. But outcomes were poor, and so I began to train the staff there and building in the training all the creative things that I was beginning to develop and think about and use. So, for example, in every family who we saw in a family assessment, we told a story. We created a story for them, and they would finish the story, and that told us a lot about who they were. And all the staff were trained in that, and we had hundreds and hundreds of stories that were created over years, and the impact on families was just absolutely sometimes magical.
Wow.
That one story would shift the family tremendously. And I began to do more in my clinical side. I focus on, actually was able to create a playroom, which didn't exist then, bought all the materials, and then I started to use puppets. And the puppets actually accelerated the work I was doing. The things I could do with puppets that I couldn't do myself, in challenging kids, in triangulating, in congratulating and celebrating and modeling and so on. And then started to build in much more game playing and starting to create games. So I was really blessed in an agency that I didn't have to go to somebody and say, "Can I do this?"
Right.
I was say, "Hey gang, let's try this. Let's see what happens." And we did strategic training. We went to Boston for training. We went to Toronto for training as a whole team, and that was really a wonderful environment. And over the years, what happened is the agency grew, of course, and I was 80% clinical, then 60% clinical, then 40% clinical, then 20% clinical. So the last 5 years, I always carried a case. And I ask all my managers to carry a couple of cases, because I think we need to stay grounded in the real world. So that kept me sort of alive in that therapy. But as I began to do less clinical, I began to do more training in the agency, training for CAPT, training privately, training from other agencies, hearing about me and saying, can you come and do some work on family assessment or family therapy or on play therapy or on puppets. And that was my beginning, and it became a passion for me to really not just use the skills that I had developed and learned about, but to share them and to build them. And so when the Play Therapy Association, I came a couple of years after it started. There was a small core of people who were moving it forward, and I went on the board, and I became very, very involved. And it really was a vehicle that I was so thrilled to be a part of. It was young, it was vibrant, it was experimental, and it slowly began to attract more and more people to enter that world of play. And since then, we have more research on that actually has validated why play is important, why it makes a difference. The outcome studies are beginning to come, and that's really exciting. I think that's one of the weak points of our play world is that we need much more solid research in the for play therapy, and there's just prove that from A to B it makes a big difference.
Wow, thank you so much for sharing all of that. That is a remarkable story, and one that is it's like, as you were sort of commanding or being in control as the executive director, continuing to develop all of these skills, not only for yourself but for your clinicians, and that's just remarkable. Thank you. I know that you in your foundation training, at least when I was there, you had at least one co-therapist who I don't know if you called him a co-therapist, but I believe was his name Zip? I can't remember.
Oh yes, my truck.
The zipper. Yeah. And that stuck with me for a really long time. And I know that a lot of those folk Manus puppets, they do go retired, and sometimes they're hard to find. But I have been able to find some other toys with that same capacity to kind of zipper things up and keep things safe. And so anyways, I just want to let you know that sometimes I think about Zip when I think about you, and I think about the days. It was the year where, I don't know, maybe you did this every year in Toronto, where you send us out into the wild of Toronto downtown and we have to talk like using our puppets. And so yeah, that was amazing, just amazing. And I still have that helper with me today, so
Yeah, puppets really became a fascinating part of my world, and they really have so many roles, and co-therapist is one of them.
Mm.
I am never stuck when I have a puppet nearby, and if I don't have a puppet, I'll use my hands or a pen or a banana. So there's something that talks, or my shoe.
Okay.
That you always have um, a another party there who's able to get you unstuck, even by saying, "Greg, are you stuck?" Yeah, I don't know what to do. Well, maybe you've got to think of what you need to do, and the puppet may not have the answer, but it'll help me reflect, and it'll help. Perhaps, why don't you just ask Johnny, what he thinks. I never thought of that. Johnny, what do you think? So it's and the other part of my puppet story is that we took training in I forget the name of the program, but there's Kids on the Block. It's a US program, and we purchased the program, very expensive, and they have scripts that use these almost life-size puppets around anxiety, depression, and handicap, and so on. And but it was very Americanized, and the one on bullying, it talked about Uzi guns, and so, which very, very American. This is in the 80s now. And we asked permission to change the script slightly, and they said, nope, can't change a word, you have to do it word for word. So our response was, okay, we'll just do something better. And so we got a grant, and we created our own puppets, and wrote them, trademarked them. And we have a gang called the Friends and Neighbors Club through the Phoenix Center, multiracial, and we created a program, went to all the schools locally to present to kids different social skills, mental health issues, and that grew. We actually sold the program to some organizations outside, and I've sometimes brought the puppets to training. Those are those life-size large puppets. And that opened a whole new world. And I'm now that I've left the Phoenix Center, it's unfortunately doesn't seem to be going anywhere. So I'm looking at creating another podcast that will be using puppets to teach kids about some of the different aspects of mental health.
Oh, that is so great. It's such a safe way to do it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Kids respond to puppets better than they respond to people often.
Yeah, for sure. What age range do you find it's most beneficial, or is there a cutoff age where you're like, I don't think I can use a puppet with this kid?
Well, one of the things that I teach is don't worry about age, that you can, as young as 2, you can use puppets. You don't necessarily have the same breadth of what you do with a puppet, or what a puppet can impact a child at 2. But I use puppets for 2-year-olds, 8-year-olds, 12-year-olds, 20-year-olds, 40-year-olds, 80-year-olds, with family. Best couple of work I've done is with puppets. Couple being able to talk through puppets and say things that they have been hesitant saying, and have fun with it. It's remarkable. Are there people who don't take to puppets? Absolutely. It could be any age, 4-year-old, a 10-year-old, a 12-year-old, very rare. But then that's the great thing about play therapy. There's 100 other things you can do. But but I do encourage people to try puppets with your adult population. Use puppets with your families. Have each family member pick up a puppet and talk with each other about the things they like about each other. And it does that projection technique, and that it's very much attached to narrative model. It allows people to say things when they're outside of themselves that they perhaps wouldn't have the ease in saying.
Right. And, and as you're talking, I'm thinking about, like, there's a lot of talk right now about things like parts work, and like Gestalt is coming back, in terms of writings, and, so I hear elements of that as well, the projection onto the object or the puppet, right? And so very cool. And so, you had mentioned that there's, like, you've written, stories and stories and stories for families. Do you have any publications that reflect that, where people could either, get training in that, or, that kind of thing?
Yeah, I think storytelling has a lot of people ask, they want something more intensive on storytelling, which actually is one of the things I'm going to be developing. And they've asked for a book or a manual on stories, just sample stories on all the different types of issues that come up for kids or families. And that's actually now on my radar to do. It's been there for 30 years I have the stories all over the place, but I haven't necessarily collated them or put them together or created a common format. So that would be my project. Hopefully in the fall, I'll have a publication that will be the sample stories to use by category. Here's anxiety stories, here's depression stories, here's bedwetting stories, here's
Right.
stories when relationship issue or social skills issues, etc.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that'll be great. So what I'm wondering is, you were talking about, I think you said it was called Kids on the Block, and then the sort of the spin-off of that you created at the Phoenix Center. And was that in the 80s that was happening?
It would probably be in the early 90s.
Early 90s. Okay. Yeah, I had a memory of, like, folks coming into my school with puppets, and I couldn't quite remember what that was about, but that would have been somewhere in the mid to late 80s, probably, something like that.
Yeah. Is that Owen Sound actually purchased a program? If you're near Owen Sound, they run.
Yeah.
And did some things in Toronto, Calgary. So it's something that was getting larger, but one of the issues in being in a small agency, we didn't have any more. I was a marketer, I was the developer, created the scripts. So it's all, when there's an extra 20 minutes to do something, you do those pieces, which I enjoy. I actually live well in a world of chaos. I like chaos, because out of chaos often comes your best ideas.
Mm-hmm.
And your best, if things are just always on a level all the time, it doesn't really push or challenge you.
Right. So, having worked in a clinic for as long as you did as the executive director, and you've been retired. How long have you been retired from that position there?
About 6 months.
Oh, that's it. Oh, well, congratulations. What were you noticing maybe before you left with the state of things with the pandemic and budgets, and what families needed in this really difficult time for children's mental health?
Yeah, that's a huge topic. I think in the last 5 or 6 years, I had an active role in a number of leadership areas of the province nationally to try and shift the mental health system, to try and shift the focus. I'm very pleased to say that there is now a much more positive focus on mental health and a need for mental health and resilience in Canada and probably across the world. It's really come of age that people are saying, hey, this is not it would be nice to have, this is a have to. And COVID, I think, even magnified that more. And I do see that the impact on not just children, but on families, on individuals. But it was happening, even if COVID hadn't happened, I think, workplace stress, parenting issues. Parenting is under huge assault from parents having so much more stresses and strains, single parents, even two parents, buying a house, the financial situation, the childcare, the childcare issues that are still existing, where many parents can't find a place for the kids or a safe place that they feel comfortable with. Schools that are challenged by increased behavioral issues and don't have all the supports and don't have the training sometimes to provide the appropriate supports. The unfortunate, the educational system, I think, needs a tremendous change. Even in the mental health side, the client needs to be the child, not the school or the teacher. And for many working with kids in schools, the client is the principal, the school, the teacher, what's best for the classroom. And that it doesn't work in good clinical work. The client is a person who you're seeing, and they're the ones that you need to accommodate and to meet the needs of. There's a lot of, I was pushing harder at not moving away from individual work, but having a greater focus on community development, on classroom strategies. So instead of working with Johnny, who has anxiety, where there's 5, 6 kids who have anxiety in that class, and probably all kids have some anxiety, why not bring programming in that works with the whole classroom to help them develop connections with each other, relationships, empathy, self-regulation? All of these are common issues that we work individually with kids, but we have a lot of skill to span that out and work at a larger systems level to teach teachers, educators, social service workers, welfare workers to be client-centered. And to, if I think of Ontario Works in Ontario, if you, there was many workers felt the pressure of getting people off of assistance. So you found, you broke this rule, now you can't get. And in fact, in earlier days, I think it was the early 2000s, there's a rule that if you broke one rule, you're off of assistance forever.
Right.
And rules such as, if you gave me a $50 gift and I was on assistance, I didn't declare it, and my neighbor then, and they had snitch lines. They actually created snitch lines. My neighbor says, hey, Greg got $50 from Billie-Jo. And my worker says, did you get $50? Yeah. Well, you didn't claim it, so now you're off welfare forever. Like, wow. How degrading and how awful.
Dehumanizing. Yeah.
So we really need to think about the systems. Social determinants of health has to be on our purview. We all have to become advocates. And I think that's not enough of our work. I'm very happy when I work with people who take on a system and they fight for a child because the child welfare system has not been appropriate, or the social assistance system is not appropriate, or they advocate at a school level, or they advocate to try and get this person to have a better financial, get into housing, get up front in housing, jump the queue because they have 5 kids in a 1-bedroom house. That advocacy needs to be part of a role, but also part of a role is influencing the eradication of poverty, the housing issue, the finance issue, all those social determinants of health that we know are creating the problems. And we need to stop picking people out of the river and look at where they're being pushed in and stop people from pushing them in.
Right.
There's funding is an interesting one, and I'm not that popular in my leadership system of other executive directors who are always fighting for more money. I say there's enough money. There's enough money in our system. It's just not used right. There's a huge waste of resources, especially at year end. And the way the government is, if you don't spend it, you lose it. And you have this March Madness where you're suddenly buying desks and things. But if I could keep that 20,000 and put it into next year to create staffing, no, you can't do that. So we have a financial system from the provinces and the federal government that doesn't work, that actually promotes inefficiency, promotes not using money wisely, and you can't shift money. I have some money in box A, but I can't use it in box B. But I guess I'll get more A stuff. I don't really need it.
Right.
And if we could just get some rethinking of how agencies are, there's a lack of trust of organizations from government. You're probably going to cheat. You're not going to use money wisely. And it's like anywhere else. Most of us are pretty honest, and most of them job, and you create these systems against you have it's like having an agency with 300 workers, and one worker uses their computer for booking a flight on a holiday, and now they have a policy: all workers have to do this.
Right.
Here's regulations, and there's so much of that, it actually starts to impact the system and efficiency and feeling safe. And I think that whole employment piece is the HR of organizations is huge. There's a huge move for private practice, which is great, but agencies are struggling. They can't find people. Yeah. McDonald's, local Tim Hortons in Barry's Bay, they're only open from 6 to 3.
Wow.
They can't find anybody to work. And at the clinical level, and education all over the place, we have these gaps in people, and people are moving a lot faster between organizations, or moving in and out of working with agency, working out, and they're not happy in organizational work. Why are they not happy? Because there's restrictions, because there is waste of time, because there is too much documentation required, because there are too many meetings, and people say, I could do more. And so really rethinking how we are building our systems. And again, at the Phoenix Center, I had the advantage where I had a wonderful board for all of my years of service. They're extremely supportive. They loved the staff. They loved the work we do. We gave them our outcome studies, and we were able to do amazing stuff and attract people, even though we paid less and we had difficult work. If you create a culture, an environment of learning, of growing, of sharing, of connecting with each other, we do more training than most organizations in the world. And we created training funds creatively. We didn't have any more money than anyone else, but we could find ways of doing $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 of training a year, even though our budget has $5,000. But that's that out of the box thinking that's really required. And so fighting for more money, we could get another $10 billion in our system, and within a year, people are going to say there's not enough.
Right.
We have to change the way things are funded, the way things are working. We have to give more trust to organizations that they're going to do a good job. Here's the money. You figure out what boxes those money goes in. We're not going to, you can only spend this here and this there, this there. That restrictive work. Probably the most frustrating part as executive director was working with the government and working with budgets and we always found creative ways of managing our budget and working with other agencies and shifting money back and forth that isn't necessarily the way that auditors like you to do things, but it made it work, and it made us it prepared us to be able to do better work and to have more efficiency and to more have effectiveness. And then around the work that we're doing is we have to get to outcome studies. We have to, and we do lots of training. In the last 5 years, I was getting a little bit worried about our agency as well as many other agencies. So you take IFS training, internal family systems training, you train all your staff. How do we know that actually made a difference?
Right.
So have the training, they're using it, but are we serving families faster? Are we serving families better? I actually don't know. And I said, that's a problem that I don't know that we take up solution for, we do brief service. We actually did outcome studies on brief service. We know that the majority of families actually benefit from that, but we're not doing that for our deeper dives. We have a trauma program. We think it's really good, but we don't have evidence that it actually is good. And so we have all these new things coming out and new models and new packages of models, DBT and DDP and IFS, you name
All
it,
the
right?
acronyms, yeah.
Radical acceptance, and these all are great things, but we lack our internal evidence that start asking our clients, is this making a difference for you? We need to look at the data and be data driven.
Right.
And yeah, you know what? This is making a difference. Let's do more of it. And I love solution focused principles. If it's not working, do something different.
Right.
And it's working, do more of the same. And that's a mantra that I follow for everything. And I tell people that as well. They're looking for something to do different with the client. Say, well, is what you're doing working? Yeah. Then why would you look for something different? Right. Well, I just thought it'd be interesting. Does your client need you to do something more interesting, or do they want you to do what's already working?
Yeah.
Well, I kind of want me to do what's already working. Right. Yeah.
Well, and as you're talking, the power of what you were talking about earlier when we first started talking here today, the power of metaphors, and all I can see in my head is that donkey, getting pulled one way, and then the resistance, right? And the way that system could react differently if things were shifted, and the way that could trickle down to families. So many things that were just happening there for me as I was listening to what you had to say. Thank you so much. So just in closing here today, I'm wondering, there was a lot that you just said about advocacy and, the principles of organization, social work principles, what we're doing with people, evidence-based stuff. For the folks that are just starting out in this field or are interested in becoming child clinicians or play therapists, do you have any advice for them?
Well, I could probably give advice for a whole day. But
right.
Some of the quick ones. Never fear failure. It is in failing or making a mistake that you learn the best. If you never make a mistake, your learning will actually be compromised. But be open to admitting, be open to constructive criticism. Second, be reflective of who you are, how you're feeling, how you're working. Really think about, am I doing the best I can? Could I be doing something different? Am I being stagnant in how I am, presenting myself in the work? Is there something what is it that clients are getting from me? What is it that I'm contributing to my agency? What am I contributing to the world? So that reflective, I love that reflective thinking process, and people who have that tend to grow more. Third thing is practice. If whenever one of the issues, and it is an unfortunate criticism of the play therapy program and a lot of these programs, is you get a lot in a very short period of time, and it's impossible for anybody to be good at doing all of those pieces. So pick out what you can that makes sense to you, and if you don't use it, you lose it. You got to use it, and then you might try something different. And don't don't worry about trying to learn everything at once. I was working with I'm doing consultation with a person, and she's taken 8 trainings in the last 3 months. And I said, okay, you're overwhelming yourself, and you're actually good at any of those models. You pick the one that kind of makes sense to you and use that and practice it. And then you might move to another one. But you're not just collecting information and becoming a compendium of all this wonderful knowledge is not going to translate into skill. What translates into skill is like, if I'm trying to learn to play the guitar and the banjo and the piano and the saxophone and the flute and the drums all at the same time, I'll probably in 20 years not have much skill in playing anything.
Right.
If I start with guitar and get really good at it, and now I go to the banjo and I get good at it, now I add the drums. And if you look at some of those musicians, they can play 5, 6, 7 instruments. They didn't start with 7 instruments. There might be some too. But those are very few, and I'm not a genius. So 1% of population can maybe do multiple things.
Right.
So be good to yourself. Self-care is really important. We have a higher level of burnout, vicarious trauma than I think has existed before. And so pay attention to your body, pay attention to your health, make sure you are good to yourself. And probably the final piece of advice I think is critical is you need good supervision.
Mm-hmm.
And the real world is the real world for anything. There's good social workers, there's okay social workers, and there's terrible social workers. There's good teachers, there's okay teachers, and there's terrible teachers. There's good judges, and you can do this, judges, lawyers, it wouldn't matter what the world is. And all supervisors are not the same. Are you growing? Are you learning? And if you're not, and you may not have control of that, seek supervision consultation outside. Find someone who you connect to. And I do love that a lot of the play therapy registrants are actually trying different supervisors because there's different styles. Mm-hmm. And one may click in some way, but they come from different angles. How I work is different from Betty, is different than Teresa, is different than Lori. And that's actually okay. Yeah. And if you're not connecting or clicking, then don't feel bad that you fire that advisor, in a nice way. You find somebody else. That's your biggest growth. And actually, in the longer term, your biggest growth will become from teaching others and training others and presenting, because that forces you to capsulize what you know and to label what you know and to understand what you know. And that's where you really become an expert at things.
Yeah. That integration piece just solidifies when you're able to do that teaching. Mm-hmm. Well, thank you so much here, Greg, for your time today. I so appreciate it. I love hearing the story about how you became a supervisor, both for the Phoenix Center as well as a CAPT supervisor, and everything that you offer, from puppets to metaphors. And that donkey metaphor is going to stick with me now here for a while. And hopefully I can figure out what that's all about. But I'm going to take that and try and learn from it a little bit. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. And have fun.
Mm-hmm.
Take care.
This podcast was proudly brought to you by the Purple Butterfly Healing Center in Cambridge, Ontario, Canada. For more information about the Purple Butterfly Healing Center and child and play therapy, please visit our website at www.purplebutterfly.ca.